I am Paul Vixie from Farsight Security. I am very gratified to see so many people coming out for this. It is a topic that is at best terminally obscure and geeky, and I always think that nobody loves this stuff but me. So I'm going to talk a bit about passive DNS and some interesting conclusions that we have come to using passive DNS. It turns out you can do more with it than making databases that you do lookups in, which we're exploring. So some of what I'm going to describe are commercial products, but all of our commercial products are also made available free of charge to academic users or other people who have sort of internet superhero second lives where they're not paid for the work they do that uses our stuff. So please don't treat this as a commercial presentation. If you have some idea for how to make the internet safer or how to do study using this, please contact me. I'm always interested in grant proposals of that kind. Nevertheless, this is all output from a commercial company, and I am very interested in some of the conclusions I can now draw about the global DNS that were not really possible in my previous nonprofit world. It, in other words, takes quite a bit of equipment and people to come up with some of this stuff. So the slides are available. There is some kind of an online proceedings available from Black Hat Europe, and you will have a copy of these slides. And you'll note that there are almost 60 of them. I'm not going to go through them in detail. The reason we have very detailed slides is in case you want to read up afterward. What I really want to do is get through sort of the top level of the material and save time for questions. So I'm counting on you guys to not be shy. I'll leave time at the end that will be wasted if you don't use it for questions. So, everything you do on the internet, everything anybody does on the internet, statistically speaking, begins with a DNS transaction. Every mouse click, every finger tap, everything you're doing, every mail you send, every website you visit, is going to form some number of TCP/IP sessions that you probably know about how those are constructed in terms of the packets. But in order to figure out where to send the control signals of TCP/IP, a DNS transaction is done first. Now, what's interesting there is I really do mean all activities. In other words, everything that any good person or any malicious person wants to do is going to begin with a DNS transaction. And certainly the world's intelligence services, various governments have discovered that DNS is a wonderful data mine to go look at what people are looking up in order to figure out what their interests are. No doubt some of the commercial social networking companies are doing the same. I'm going to describe our approach to personally identifiable information later, but the important thing for now is to just realize that if you are a malicious person and you want to do bad things, you're going to be incenting your victims to make DNS lookups of domain names that you control, or make DNS lookups that lead to addresses that you control, or maybe name servers that you control. And so by trying to set up the malicious infrastructure that will be used to victimize people, you're going to have to put things into the DNS. There's an awful lot of anonymity on the internet, and certainly with WHOIS, law enforcement services around the world have told me that it is absolutely hopeless to use WHOIS to go find out who did what to whom for attribution or recourse or whatever. And part of that is because of WHOIS privacy, where there's a large number of people who are concerned about activism, political activism, and the possibility that a nation state could act against its own citizens if they then had a protest website or whatever. I don't think that's the biggest use of WHOIS privacy. I think criminals are more likely to be doing that. But even when you don't use WHOIS privacy, you don't really have to use an accurate home address or phone number or anything else. So we think of WHOIS as a joke. But DNS is not a joke. If you don't put the truth into DNS, it won't work. And so if you can gather an awful lot of DNS material, then you can find out an awful lot about what the bad people did in order to create the infrastructure for various attacks. And I'm going to show you some of that now. If you look at all of the DNS traffic that comes into our system, that is over 200,000 events per second. It's coming from a global network of over 500 servers, and it is a difficult programming problem. I'm not saying that the people at Google or people at Facebook aren't processing data of that magnitude trivially at this stage, but when they first started, it was hard. And when we started, it was hard. And most of it's junk. Most of it is duplicative. A lot of it is DNS tunnels. A lot of it is just stuff that it won't help you at all to look at it. And so we have had to come up with various ways to filter it down, reduce the volume, increase the signal, increase the value. And one of the things that we've done is to tune out the old invariant stuff, look for certain patterns like, okay, I've never seen this domain name before, and it is, it ends in .com. It's a new .com name. I wonder if it was just created right now, or if maybe it's existed for a while and I'm just seeing it for the first time. This type of filtering is absolutely necessary. And in the Security Information Exchange, which is one of the things that I said is available either commercially or non-commercially, depending on who you are. I see some customers in the audience. We have different channels for different versions of that data. So certainly anybody who wants the 200,000 per second, that's available, but it's hard, and we let people know that is hard. Skip this one. I mentioned that there's a lot of personally identifiable information in the DNS. So what I've drawn here is the standard 3-level model of how DNS works. This laptop is representative of the bottom of this model. This would be a stub resolver. It is making queries of recursive servers probably somewhere in this building that are connected or that are part of the service of this wireless internet. And when it makes those queries, that is personally identifiable information, because somewhere in the infrastructure there's a binding between the MAC address, that's a 48-bit Ethernet address that this thing uses when it talks on the wireless, and the IP address. And later, somewhere in the net flow, there is going to be a binding between what that IP address went and contacted. And so if, let's say, this was used to surf the web, surf some dark part of the web that was illegal in this country, it is possible, through the use of subpoena power and so forth, for somebody to ultimately determine that you were probably the one who did certain things, because you were the one who owned the laptop, who had the MAC address, who got the IP address, who did the lookups. So I don't like that. So further up that chart, you see that the recursive servers, they have a cache, and that cache is the reason the DNS has scaled. It was originally an academic toy, but it's now serving 2 billion users, and design hasn't changed much. And the reason is that if this laptop asks for something that has been seen recently, somebody else has asked for in recent hours, that's going to come out of the cache. And so all the popular names tend to get cached everywhere, and then the unpopular stuff, the rarely looked up stuff, goes up further. That's where the recursive server has what we call a cache miss, and it has to go up to the authority servers where content is injected into the DNS in order to get the answers, which then go into the cache and then go back to the stubs. We put our sensor above the recursive because I don't want to know the IP address of the person who did the lookup. Not every passive DNS collector does this, and if you are using a recursive name server somewhere that is not yours, if you're not the operator of this thing in the middle, you need to worry about what they're doing with their query logs, because they know what you did. So there's a lot of perfectly good free software that will perform that recursive DNS function for you. I wrote some of it called Bind, but there's Power DNS, there's Unbound, there's a lot of very good software. If you're not sure who's looking at your traffic, you probably should be running your own recursive name server rather than using Google's or OpenDNS or your ISPs. So I'm not in the surveillance business. I have more data than anybody as far as I know, but it's not attached to any end users. I like to help with investigations. I like to enhance investigations, but I don't like to be the place where they start. One of the really hot buttons about any internet security person would be online child abuse materials, sometimes called child pornography. If I was in possession of information about who had looked up a name that I knew was associated with that, I might even have disclosure obligations to my own local police department. I don't want that. It's not that I don't want to stop that from happening. I just don't want to be at that point in the loop. I'd much rather be the place where you can find out where those domains were served so that you can go enhance an investigation. But again, I am not going to help start them. Enough said about that, except to just try to drive home. Every time I talk to a new sensor operator to get my network extended, I have this conversation to let people know I won't know what your customers did, what your employees did, what your family did. I won't know any of that because we're looking above and all that information is below. So this just details what I just said, but there's other information also that we have to filter out upstream. For example, if you have a local network that is using NAT, and certainly any mid to large company has a good chance of having some servers inside your network that don't have globally unique addresses. They're in network 10 or they're in network 192, 168, whatever. And if you are returning information about that network through your recursive server, you probably don't want it in my database, and you probably don't want me to analyze it. That would be information about internal business practices or internal technology policies. So we filter that out in the sensor itself, but then we filter out quite a bit more of it after we receive the data in the center, which is what I call the security information exchange. So inevitably there is some PII that isn't your IP address, is what I'm saying, and that also has to get filtered out. So to the extent that you're participating in any passive DNS project or that you think your recursive name server might be doing, check that. So, most new domain names are useless. They're malicious. They are created by somebody who has the purpose of either committing a crime or spamming people or annoying them in some way. And I will tell you, now that I have watched the stream of newly observed domain names, we take that 200,000 events per second and boil it down to things that are legitimately new over the 6-year history of our database, and it's about 1 new delegation per second. It's bursty, so it's about 50,000 a day. There are 86,000 seconds in a day, so it works out to about 1 per second over the long run. Half of them are 5 random letters .tk, which is the Tokolo Islands. This is a URL shortener for spammers. It's like bit.ly for spammers. And I'm not sure why we built a global internet in order to help those people do those things, but they are. A lot of the rest of it, though, is not any more useful than that. It is just stuff that was created in order to make a certain phishing attack work. So it might have some well-known brand name in the middle of the domain name somewhere, and it's just created for the purpose of sending a bunch of spam, trying to get people to click on something that maybe they think is their bank or their grocery store or whatever, and then credential theft, and then poof, the domain's gone. Most of these things really we could live without. There might be 1 million new domain names per year that the internet legitimately needs in order to facilitate communication between parties who want to communicate with each other, and the rest is for people who want to communicate with me that I don't want to communicate with back, right? So it's unilateral service. If you see me at the bar later, I'll tell you things I think we could do to make that better, but right now let's focus on the analysis. So there's an awful lot of block lists or IP blacklists or network reputation systems. I actually started the first anti-spam company called MAPS, M-A-P-S, back in the 90s, which we later sold to pay our lawyers because it turned out sending spam was not illegal, but stopping it was an antitrust violation. So learning the hard way. But there are an awful lot of reputation services out there. Spamhaus is probably the best known, and everybody is using them. And when you see those queries in your query string, you probably don't want to save those either. As criminals create resources, they get their hands on some IP address space, or they create some domain names, and then they create some bindings in DNS between those names and those numbers. Various providers like Spamhaus are going to discover this. They're going to see spam. They're going to see they're going to get complaints. And because we now know that who is garbage, you can't complain to the person who purports to own the domain. That you pretty much have to stop it yourself. You can't stop it from coming into the internet at the far end, so you have to stop it from getting out of the internet at your near end, and we do that with network reputation systems. This is not the most efficient way to build a global internet, but it is. Don't hate the players, hate the game. So as we kill more stuff, they will create more stuff. There is not some critical point above which, if we just kill off enough of their infrastructure, they'll give up and decide to get real jobs. We have to be prepared for endless escalation along this track, which is why we say lather, rinse, repeat. A beautiful picture of a hurricane here. DNS, if you're just looking at your part of it, the part that you're creating, if you have a vanity name, you might have www.paulvixie.org or something like that. It looks like the picture on the right. In other words, it's a big place, but it's mostly static. And that's not true. If you sit in the middle of it and watch what people are looking up, which is where we are, it looks much more like the picture on the left. There is just a huge amount of material flying around all the time. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. We're seeing somewhere between 150 and 300 newly observed host names per second. Those aren't the delegation points that I told you about earlier, like name.com. I'm talking about subdomain.name.com. And that means that out there in the internet, host names are being added at the rate of hundreds per second. Now, I don't think we're adding hosts at that speed. I think most of these names point to things that are not real hosts, and I'll get into that in a moment. But if you look at the other view, which is how many DNS changes are we seeing? In other words, this name and this type, like www.example.com would be a name and A would be a type for address. Has this name and type pointed at something differently before this moment? In other words, am I seeing a change, a delta in the DNS? Well, we're seeing even more of those than we see of new host names. And I don't think that represents the actual churn of internet infrastructure being added and renumbered and changed. I realize we have 2 billion users and we've got ISPs in every country and so forth. I just don't think this represents real stuff. And I was right. So I have a movie, which I am hoping is going to work. This is a debug trace, protocol trace of the newly observed domain channel, or newly observed hostname channel. So this is trying to keep up with a 300 or so record per second output rate. Obviously, it's not succeeding, but you get the idea that staring at this would get you nowhere. You really have to be prepared to watch this with software rather than with human eyes. And let me caution you against putting it in a database and then running queries against it. I realize that big data makes that possible, but that doesn't make it useful. So we use a continuous processing model. We don't treat security information as particles. We treat it as waves. And so everything I've described to you so far, except that 6-year historical database, 6 years and growing, is done in RAM. And we have just a long string of pearls where certain little Linux blades and Linux 1U servers interact somewhere. continue to receive the raw data, break it down further, get the cooked data from the guy upstream of them and break it down further, and so forth. And I don't know of another way to process data at this volume except to do this. Certainly if we had had the idea that we would put everything in a database and then from the database create the outputs that we've seen, I would have nothing to show you today. So, you know, I am just barely old enough to remember punch cards and green bar paper. And that is how data processing worked in those days. You put everything in a database and you ran queries against it. And again, Hadoop makes that possible, but that doesn't make it useful. So please, as you consider how you're going to process your own syslog files, for example, think about how to grab everything that's happened recently, remember the important parts of what's happened recently, and then basically treat it as a hurricane with puzzle pieces flying through the air. And if you grab a piece that happens to fit another piece in your hand, then you're making progress. Don't wait for the hurricane to end, and then at the end of the day, see what you got. So let's talk about newly observed domains and host names. Obviously, all host names are domains. So we're stuck with some bad technical terms here for marketing reasons. Our first channel was called Newly Observed Domains, by which I mean delegation points. For example, in NL, it's possible, I think, for people to register names directly under the country code. So you could get paulvixie.nl here, and that would be a delegation point. But if I create host names at my house, like server 1 and server 2.paulvixie.nl, those are not delegation points. So anyway, bear with me. I'm sorry for butchering the terminology, but we call the longer things host names and the shorter things domains, even though it's really the longer things are domains and the shorter things are delegation points. Right. So newly observed domains or newly observed delegation points look like this in our data scope. Obviously, it's binary data on the wire. And so what you're seeing here is the domain we discovered, the delegation point we discovered, and then you're looking into the DNS transaction that caused us to discover it. And in this case, the resource record name was the same as the delegation point. This shows us no longer names, but it does, in this case, tell us what the name servers were for a delegation point. And that is potentially useful information if you have some idea that other things that have pointed at the same name servers turned out to be evil. Maybe this is evil too. That's the kind of thing that you have to, it's the kind of thinking that goes into the continuous processing that I'm describing. Anyway, we're not saying that all new domains are bad. I happen to know that that's true, but that's not what we say. What we say is newly observed domains deserve extra scrutiny. Good. So I'll come to that later. Here are some domains that we saw. We took a 24-hour snapshot of our newly observed domain channel, and we just looked around for PayPal and some other fairly well-known brand names. And we found that PayPal gets used a lot. And if you look at that bottom one, www.paypal update information ID mumble, that was clearly part of a phishing attack. That was where somebody got some targeted email that said, PayPal can't reach you until you go and correct your information. Please log in by clicking here. And if you're not an information security professional, you're going to look at that and say, oh, PayPal update. Yeah, I'll click on that. It's sad that we had to build the whole human economy with monkey DNA, but that's what we are. We like to click on things. PayPal.accountsolved.com and so forth. I'm using PayPal as my example. Obviously, there are thousands of brands that are abused in this way. But to be successfully abused in this way, you have to have some idea that people really are likely to be customers of it, right? If you get this email and you are not a PayPal user, you're gonna know it's false. So you won't see things for your grocery store or whoever makes your beer, but you will see your bank and you will see your cable TV company and so forth. But a lot of the in those examples, you see that a lot of the branding violations were not at the top level. right? So that the second one, for example, accountcheckpaypal.fic-whatever.com, the fic-rpm.com is what shows up as a newly observed delegation point, but the longer name is what actually is used to carry the malicious information, which is the branding violation. And that's why we have a second channel. But that second channel has got a lot higher volume. It's hundreds per second as opposed to 1 or 2 per second. Here's what a newly observed host name looks like. So it's a very similar schema. And you can see the domain name that we pulled out of it, but you can also see that the RR name had this pile of junk dot the delegation point. And I'm not going to try and say that word, Yuko, whatever. But it's a real word. It's in the dictionary. And the I don't have no idea how they come up with this stuff. Perhaps they have a dictionary that feeds them names. But we did some deeper checking on that. We wanted to say, all right, what is this? And of course, who is was useless. So we went deeper into it and said, all right, that was a CNAME. Right, a CNAME is an alias in the DNS. That means if you look up the RR name, you're going to get redirected to the thing at the bottom there called the R data. So let's take a look at that R data, frontus.secretmedia.com. That doesn't sound safe to me. That sounds, like something you might want to avoid. So we fiddled around on their website and learned almost nothing, except that Wall Street Journal has had an article about them being an advertiser who is pretty good at evading ad blocking. And it turns out that's what this is for, which is that these are the names that appear in the website. And so your ad blocker would have to know every one of those random gibberish things dot this unpronounceable second level name in order to know that this was an ad, because the ad blocker doesn't get a chance to see what the CNAME points to and know that the CNAME should be poisoned and anything that points to it should be poisoned. So it's a layering problem that is kind of it's a loophole in the way ad blocking happens. I think you can expect to see a lot more of this, and then the web browser people will catch up and actually expose the CNAME to the ad blocker plugin in order to close this loophole. So yes, it's just random crud. We looked around to see if there was any pattern to it, and there was a little bit of a pattern to it, but not enough that you could hook onto it with some algorithmic plugin. You really have to know what CNAME it points to if you're going to discover that this is something an ad blocker should grab. But we also looked for, since we have a database that goes back 6 years, we looked and said, all right, can we just find all of the other things that have appeared in the last week that were CNAMEs to that same place? And we found 700,000 of them that shared this particular unpronounceable second-level name. But then we found a whole bunch of other interesting stuff. AtomicPowerSeductress.net. I want to go there. We've drilled down on a single example, but you understand that in the 24-hour sample we took, there was a hurricane of similar wreckage. And if you want to protect yourself from all of it, you're going to need to spend some time contemplating that hurricane and deciding what it means to you and what it means to you in terms of policy that you might want to have toward these new names. Or policy you might want to have toward domain names that have this type of structure, this type of pattern, like being a whole bunch of different things all CNAMing to the same place. That could be something you just decide, if it's got that many CNAMes, I don't want to go there no matter what it points to. Okay. And I do want to say, we in the security industry are clearly all trying to do well by doing good, right? We want to get paid for doing meaningful work. And a lot of the meaningful work involves defense. It involves figuring out what the criminals are doing now or what they're going to do next, and then helping our customers avoid damages from those actions. And that's all good, but we need to do more, because this, to me, what I've shown you so far, signals a structural defect in Internet governance itself. Right? The DNS is not It was not created by a company. It's not owned by a company, although a lot of companies behave that way. It is us. We create the DNS every day by making queries into it and by putting our content into it. And we need to take a look at how it's being used and how it's being governed and see if maybe changes to the way domain names are registered, changes to the way whois is handled, changes somehow to the way criminals are allowed to use this could maybe save some of us some money rather than having this endless cat and mouse escalation. Let's talk about DNS changes. So far I've told you about newly observed delegation points and newly observed fully qualified names, and that's interesting, but we decided to look deeper. And since we're seeing, I don't know, somewhere between half and 2/3 of, is my estimate of how much of the DNS we can see from where we are, it becomes interesting to look at the deltas. Again, these are changes where you had a certain name and a type that pointed to a certain value up until now, and now it points at something else. Well, what is responsible for that change? It could, for example, have been something we call fast flux, which is a way of evading takedown. It could be that somebody had a legitimate renumbering event. They had a server and they needed to move it to a different subnet. They gave it a different address, and that shows up as a change. How do you tell the difference? Well, I'm going to give you some examples. So this is a one-record snapshot from channel 214 on the Security Information Exchange. You can see the timestamp. You can see it's a new domain record. You can see leet.cc was the name. And here you can see we've got those 5 binaries at the bottom telling us it's not a new domain. We've known about the domain name for a while. We've known about this RR name for a while. And we've known about this RR name and type together for a while. But we have never seen this RR associated with it before. And so that means that the RR set, the set of RRs associated with it, is also new. So that address becomes interesting. 209.126.99.231 wasn't previously pointed to by this, so it's got to have some kind of service on it. Now, services are very lightweight. A lot of IoT devices are actually servers, even though they cost a nickel. So I don't want to make servers sound like they're heavyweight, expensive objects. But still, the existence of a new one can be for good purposes or bad. And in this case, it was bad. I just went through this. Here was an interesting example, and we have defanged this by replacing the actual ASCII dot characters with bracket dot, because this is something that VirusTotal told us is a current example. There is actually a virus which is new enough that it's infected a lot of people that is generating queries like this. So if you generate queries like this, you could expect a phone call from your ISP perhaps. So in this case, we had this random looking name that had an address, 88.85.80.170, and there is stuff hosted there that you do not want to be caught fetching. And so this is criminals talking to other criminals in this case. This is not malicious software so much as malicious content. And what made that address interesting is that it was suddenly pointed to by something, and it had not been pointed to before now. So I think every new address needs to get scrutinized. Every new name needs to get scrutinized. It's sad that that's true. I wish that internet governance worked a little bit better so that we didn't have 95% or more of the new content on the internet being malicious in some way. But given that that is the situation, I think we all have to start saying that if it's new, it deserves scrutiny. And all of our research supports that. Except this. Akamai is a content delivery network. They specialize in hosting content for people that it becomes globally available. It's available in every country. They serve it with low round-trip times, low latency, high bandwidth, and so on. They're one of the first really successful companies that does this. but they do it in DNS. And so almost every answer they give is tailored for the particular user who asked the question, which means that it looks new and different, but it isn't. It means the same thing. It's just pointing different domain names into different parts of their global infrastructure. And so as you start processing things and you say, okay, these new bindings, these new names or new addresses or a new binding between a name and an address deserve scrutiny, one of the first things you're going to do is whitelist all of the CDNs. And yes, that'll make you blind to malicious content that is hosted there. But Akamai at least has a very active abuse department. They take down the bad content fast enough that you don't need to worry about them being used as a loophole against you. But we have to whitelist this because they're responsible, not Akamai itself, but about half of the 300 events per second that we're seeing 600 events per second that we're seeing are some CDN somewhere. And you don't want to waste your investigatory powers on stuff that is probably not trying to hurt you. So ideally you'll filter it out down to the level, a noise level that you can actually spend a little bit of energy looking at everything that comes out the far end of your deepest filter. Okay, I'm rushing through this. How much? We're 20 minutes left. Okay. So we decided, I think I mentioned earlier, that we did a 24-hour snapshot. And we've gone deep on a couple of the things we found in a 24-hour period. But now let me tell you the characteristics of the full 24 hours. We ended up with 29 million changes that were seen in a 24-hour period. And you can see that it had a normal diurnal pattern. So you can figure out from this exactly which industrialized nations were awake and using Facebook or whatever at different times. But my God, that's a lot of changes. So these new delegation points or base domains were interesting. In this case, I told you it's normally 1 per second. Here it's about 2 per second, right? There's 86,000 seconds in a day. Here we saw about twice that number of new delegation points created. Raise your hand right now if you think that that much good content got added to the internet during that time. Clearly this means that DNS is a good business to be in. And I guess VeriSign and Newstar and all the various top-level domain registries and GoDaddy and the other large volume registrars know that. But I'm sort of letting you know that there is a huge market for creating this stuff. And there are discounts. There are ways to get them for close to nothing. Since we are rejecting email that has dotted quads in the body of our messages, we have taught the spammers that they need new domain names for almost every message they send, and so the industry has responded by learning how to create domain names at that speed and at a price point that spammers can afford. So, yay us. So VeriSign had a different estimate, which I thought was interesting. They thought that .NET had grown about 1/3 as much as what we saw. Not .NET. They were looking at the domain name to find out how many names they had seen created during a year. And our estimate is that there should be about 64 million of them. Theirs was a lot smaller. So it turns out that they don't use the PSL. PSL, the public suffix list, was created by the browser community in order to figure out what the top level of a cookie should be. So if somebody tries to give you a cookie for .com, hoping that you allow anything ending in .com access to the DOM for that web page and so forth, it's a cross-site scripting vulnerability. So the PSL is just a ham-handed, coarse-grained filter to try and keep that from happening, but it also helps us to determine what is and is not a delegation point. So, for example, it isn't always a second-level name. In the UK, a delegation point will tend to be under .co.uk, which is their version of .com. And so the simplistic way of thinking about it, where you would say anything that is at the second level is probably a delegation point, won't work around the world. There are some things even longer than that if you look at some of the dynamic DNS providers. where they are effectively a TLD in the sense that you can buy subdomains of something, but it might be a third or fourth level name by the time you're done paying for it. So you really need to be looking at the PSL, and we let our friends at VeriSign know that their report was wrong because they had not done that. So we saw 7 million newly observed long names in that same period. 7 million of what we saw were new RR names. If you extrapolate this, we're looking at almost 3 billion new fully qualified names per year, and I wish that was wrong. Most of these are short-lived, which is why the DNS doesn't grow without bounds and then explode because of the laws of thermodynamics. Most of these things are taken down because they are criminal or they're abandoned after they have been abused. And then they don't get paid for. So luckily, this stuff disappears mostly in the same week that it's created. But we also wanted to take a look at data types. Of all the changes, of all the things that were new, where was most of the change? And here, when you look at SOA changes, this does not include serial number changes. This was something else about an SOA. And what this mostly was a new SOA that we hadn't seen before. SOA is a start of authority. It's the thing at the top of a zone that tells administrators and other name servers how to handle that zone. Obviously, A records, IPv4 was the big winner. Interestingly, we had almost 1/3% of our sample was IPv6, and that is better than we've ever seen. So I don't want to say that gives me hope that v6 could take off someday, but at least it's not dead yet. And we have the equivalent of high-frequency trading here. And I'm not going to go. I'm going to run out of time if I go through this in detail, so I'm not going to do that. And I mentioned CDNs, location-dependent answers. This study is worth reading, and if you like these slides and you want to see more, we actually have a longer technical paper about this on our website, farsightsecurity.com. And again, you can see Akamai dominates. So we will ultimately come up with a secondary channel that takes the changes channel and simply filters out all the CDN stuff in order to create a lower volume, higher signal, higher value channel so that people who want to do this type of analysis will have a starting point that isn't full of all this crud. Which really is, that's one of the things we do the most often when doing the type of waterfall or continuous processing that I'm describing, is we're just filtering stuff out and trying to make a higher value derivative of the channel than the raw data, which is, it's both a fire hose in volume and it's a deluge in terms of the number of different particle types. So I am going to just skip a lot of this. Because it would take way too long. Programmatic name generation. You've probably all heard of domain generation algorithm, botnets. Conficker was a famous one back in 2008, 2009. The idea of a DGA botnet is that if you want to infect a bunch of computers with software that is going to contact you, the bad guy, to get its instructions, like who should I DDoS or who should I spam, or what would you like me to do now that I've taken over this end user's computer. You have the problem of, if you use a domain name, then it's very possible that that law enforcement will come to your house and take all your stuff. So what you do is you don't use a static name. In the case of Conficker, I don't know exactly what this was, but in the case of Conficker, it was done based on the day. And so they ultimately would start a random number generator, or pseudo-random number generator, using by seeding it with the day of year, and the year. So on any given day, it would be trying 50,000 names that were somewhat unique to that day. There were not good math people, so there was a lot of collisions. So the same name got used on more than one day. They were slobs compared to the guys that do it today, but it's been 6 or 7 years. And what that means is that the bad guy has an opportunity, especially since these names were split over 116 different effective TLDs, which were in 110 different TLDs. And some of those TLDs were small island nations that don't exactly have a large security team that is ready to block this stuff. What that means is that if the bad guy decides that on a certain day he wants to actually command the botnet, what he has to do is register one of the 50,000 names it's going to use. And if he can register it and get contacted by his bots faster than we can notice that he's registered it and take it down, then he will have signaled a botnet to go do something potentially damaging. It was the largest botnet I had heard of at the time. Its Configure had 11 million unique IPs per day coming into our sinkhole. There are bigger ones now, but Configure itself has only shrunk down to about 1 million a day. There's still 1 million, and it's been 7 years. That might indicate that we don't care as much about DGAs as I think we should. But anyway, this notifygate69.ru is not a DGA, so I'm actually way off topic here. This has been in the Spam House blacklist for quite some time. We're not totally sure what these names are, but we know they're programmatically generated. And I am going to we're down to our last 15 minutes here, so what slide am I on? Okay. Here we reversed it, and we changed the dots to the bracket dot. And so you can see that PayPal appears sometimes at the end, sometimes in the middle of a label, sometimes as a label in the middle of a domain name, sometimes misspelled with 2 L's. This is the kind of thing that bad guys are doing. And, I'm not going to say who is or is not our customer, but I will say that we do sell this to some commercial people who want to do brand protection either for themselves or for their customers. And this is the kind of thing that you guys will need to be doing at some level. Whether you pay somebody else to do it or whether you decide you're going to do it yourself, you need to be paying attention to the way that your trusted marks are being used online far from your network. Okay, so I started this company, thank you. Started this project as part of a nonprofit company I used to work at, Internet Systems Consortium, in 2007. I took it private and made it into a commercial entity in 2013 because I was capital constrained. It was not that I was not paid well enough, it's that I could not buy enough equipment or hire enough people to do the job the way it deserved to be done. I'm trying to increase the observability of the internet. I'm trying to have it be that instead of every security company coming out the gate and setting up whatever sensors they can set up and then building fortresses around those sensors to keep their competitors from being able to see the same things, because ultimately competition is how you win customers, build revenue, and sell your company, is one of the structural defects that I talked about. That is something we do wrong that helps the bad guys. Honest to God, there are some VCs operating on Sand Hill Road in Palo Alto, Menlo Park, not far from my house, that specialize in creating new security companies and then running them in the traditional Harvard MBA style of building moats around every one of them. And if I were a bad guy, I would put tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars into that company's funds because they help me so much if I'm a bad guy. We just can't overlook this. We can't pretend that this could happen against our will. We have to be complacent and we have to be complicit in order for things to get this bad this fast. So that's why we started this. That's why I'm growing it commercially. That's why we make this data available both commercially and non-commercially. I want everybody to know what's going on so that they can all either do something about it for themselves, do something about it maybe as part of an internet superhero nighttime project, maybe do something about it for their customers, but also so that we can all be jointly aware of how bad it is, so that we might be able to put some pressure on internet governance to get the systemic defects fixed at that level as well. Whose privacy is just a travesty. I cannot find a defense of that. Or let's take another example. When I was a kid, a .com name took 2 or 3 days to create because the .com zone was only generated twice a week. And so if it's generated on Tuesdays and Fridays and you create it on Tuesday, you might get it in that day. If you create it Wednesday, you got to wait till Friday. That seemed reasonable to me, because I got to say, nobody, no team anywhere spends months developing content, developing an idea for a new business, and then gets to the day of the launch and says, oh my God, I forgot to register the domain name. So now, because they had a race to the bottom, right, the .biz and .info and separately the .org people all came in and said, we got to find a way to distinguish ourselves from VeriSign. Well, they're only publishing twice a week. Well, we could publish every day. Well, VeriSign looked at that and said, I think we could do it every hour. And somebody else said, I think we could do it every 10 minutes. And somebody else said, I think we could do it every 5 minutes. Now, eventually, that race to the bottom ends. You hit the bottom. And it turns out that the photons only travel through fiber at a certain fixed maximum rate. And so by the time they are done settling and done getting to all of your servers, about 30 seconds has gone by. And so that's why 30 seconds is the reference standard now for creating a new generic delegation point. But can anybody tell me, please, what the non-criminal purpose is of a 30-second turnaround for a new domain name? Because when I needed one for, let's say, farsightsecurity.com, you know, any time that month would have been fine. So, because of these new channels, you can now watch all kinds of stuff you couldn't watch before. We have one channel that pulls out just the NX domains. And that means that if we've got academic teams out there who are doing DGA research, where they're trying to reverse engineer the algorithm that creates these names, and then they are sort of looking for, you know, who was patient zero, right? What was the first part of the world that this name got looked up in? You know, we actually have enough data to inform that research. And there are commercial prospects as well. I don't want to sound like I'm still in the nonprofit world. I just came from there. And then finally, you know, there's an awful lot of weird stuff. And some of it you can discard en masse. You can come up with simple techniques like, oh, it's Akamai, so I'm not going to look at that. Others might require some serious cogitation to figure out what you're going to ignore. And that cogitation is a form of wisdom, because it will teach you which parts of the internet are being used in what way. And again, the internet was not created by a company, it's not owned by a company. The internet is an illusion that is made up by us who use it. And it's because we decide to follow the protocol that our systems work. And it's because we all follow the same protocol that other people can get work done and can make money and can create new companies and so forth. So somehow, out of this group illusion that we all jointly create, we also need to take the reins in hand. We need to decide what kind of an internet we want to create. We're using our power mindlessly. We're creating an internet that we don't like. I have 5 minutes, and I hope that you're going to fill them with questions. You, sir.
How do you protect your infrastructure from poisoning? I mean, specifically, like, if you do that manually, filtering, there's only, you will discover poisoning attempts later on, right? I'll give you one example with Akamai, again, which is a server which is called whoami.akamai.net, and it basically will resolve an A record to whoever asks, they will resolve to their own records. How do you deal with this?
So poisoning can take many forms, and certainly the DNS technology community has been trying to secure DNS itself. So we have transaction signatures to protect zone transfers against tampering. We have DNSSEC to allow crypto authenticity, so you can validate when you receive something that it really was generated by the owner of that domain, rather than maybe inserted by some advertiser in the middle. Maybe it's supposed to be a negative answer, but you've got a positive answer and you visit the website and it is an ad that is related to the question you were asking. There's a lot of different kinds of poisoning. I'm not seeing the connection between poisoning and the Whoami service of Akamai. So can you restate that part of your question?
Well, it's just, if I were a malicious guy, it's easy for me to set up a name server that will just, whenever you route
Yes.
And that will end up in your infrastructure. How do you protect
Ah, okay.
that
So in our passive DNS system, we go through 5 or 6 stages between deduplication and junk filtering and so forth. It's possible, I'm sure most of you know, to steal Wi-Fi in a coffee shop by running a VPN over DNS, because their paywall allows DNS to work even before you've paid the money. All of that stuff is trash that I don't want in my database, and the who am I query that you described is on my list of poison. It is something that we had to discover ultimately by looking at the graph of names. If there's a name that has too many children, we look at it. A human has to look at it. So Com has 130 million children at last count, and it's allowed to have that many children. But if it's some deeper thing and it's got millions of children, that's an indication to us that we better study it, and that it's probably something like what you're describing. In particular, the video CDN people are not as mature technically as Akamai. There are an awful lot of CDN producers that, video CDNs that partner up with cable TV companies, and they will have it be that if you want to watch a certain recorded TV show, pre-recorded TV show, or movie or something like that, that they'll send you to a paywall, and then after you enter your credit card or your password or whatever it is you enter, they give you a CNAME they give a CNAME back to your browser so that your browser will connect to the place that will actually start the media stream. And that CNAME ends up encoding your end user IP address in clear text, plus your region, plus maybe your customer number, sometimes your password. It's all in there. So when we see that, somebody on my staff will start changing our filters so that we stop recording it. We will schedule a major renovation of stored data from 2 years ago to remove it from the permanent record, and we'll get on the phone to that video CDN provider to explore with them the possible benefits to their business of one-way hashing. So that's what we do. I have 1 minute left. Any other questions?
I'm curious about how you specifically searching that PayPal similar website URL, like what technology you are using to searching those kinds.
Okay, so for the purpose of these slides, we didn't do anything fancy. We used grep. But obviously, the people that we sell this feed to are professionals at this, and they are using sound decks and other similar types of things such that if it looks the same or sounds the same when spoken, they will treat it as suspicious, and then they'll have a scoring system, and if they find enough different reasons to treat it as suspicious, they'll open a ticket on it, and human eyes will go after it. So, a truly mature system, other than making the slides for this presentation, would certainly want to say that if it would be Microsoft, except that one would have to be changed to an I, then you'd want to treat that as Microsoft. But we didn't do that. So that is something our customers do. In this case, we're not in the brand enforcement business. We just sell wholesale to other security companies who have that as one of their sidelines. I am at 0 minutes, so I'll be in the hallway. You can stay as long as you want, but I got to get off this stage before the hook comes. Thank you very much.